You have said this is a disaster. There are many thousands of Facebook employees who aren't saying anything. What has compelled you to speak out?
So what compelled me to speak out is I'm seeing the tremendous amount of harm that's being done around the world as a result of some of these business practices.
Like what?
Things like the impact on elections, not just in the US, but also Brexit. Things like some of the violence that's taken place in Myanmar and Sri Lanka and other places. And so it was seeing that drove me to want to come forward and to call out some of the business practices that I think led to this situation.
Now, you were a platform operations manager, in part responsible for policing data breaches, so that gives you some sort of unique insight into policies and how Facebook approached these things. At the time, what kinds of things did you see that troubled you?
Yeah, so I was at the company, or I left the company 6 years ago, so it's been some time. What troubled me was the general approach. It was a general approach where they didn't proactively try to uncover some of these problems. And I think with respect to Cambridge Analytica, we saw that approach in terms of the fact that they knew that Cambridge Analytica had accessed a tremendous amount of data in late 2015, but they took the company's word for it that they had actually deleted the data. They didn't take all the steps that they could have taken to prevent what ultimately led to the use of that data in a number of elections.
You've also indicated that Facebook and employees at Facebook sort of avoided asking too many questions about what was happening with the data, right?
Yeah, I think there was a general culture in the company of not wanting to, again, proactively dig in and understand what third parties were doing.
Do you think the company is changing? I mean, CTO Mike Schroepfer a couple weeks ago said that he feels like the company is now thinking cynically about how their platform might be abused. Do you believe that? Do you think that the fundamental culture of Facebook can change and that they can fix this?
So I think the culture is beginning to change, and some of the steps they have taken are good first steps. The problem is that we're continuing to see that new issues are coming out that they have not been transparent about. And so they seem to have a very defensive attitude. Rather than coming forward and saying, hey, there's a number of things that have gone wrong. Here are all the things that have gone wrong, and we want to be truly transparent moving forward to ensure this doesn't happen. That doesn't seem to be the approach.
So let's talk about some of these new things, which, revelations that Facebook shared data on users and their friends with phone makers, and not just any phone maker, also Chinese consumer device makers, some of which have been flagged by the U.S. government for national security concerns. You have some insight into how these deals were done, and that this was flagged internally as a security issue, right?
So I don't have any insight into how the deals were done. I believe it was flagged internally. I think the important thing to understand is that what this really is about is it's about a lack of trust in Facebook, and it's about a lack of transparency with regulators. The consent decree that Facebook signed with the Federal Trade Commission specifically called out the kinds of things that happened in this particular deal, and Facebook also said that they were not going to be sharing friend data anymore starting in 2014, and then they repeated that again in their testimony to Congress a couple months ago. And now we're seeing that, in fact, in some cases, that was not true. And I think that's really concerning, that even after Cambridge Analytica, there was still stuff going on that they had said that they weren't doing that was, in fact, happening.
Take a listen to Mark Zuckerberg apologizing and also defending himself before U.S. Congress. Take a listen.
I'm the first to admit that we didn't take a broad enough view of what our responsibilities were. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that there are billions of people who love the services that we're building because they're getting real value in being able to connect and build relationships on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that I'm really proud of our company for doing, and I know that we're going to keep on doing that.
That's him on a conference call actually speaking with reporters ahead of that testimony. Do you think Mark Zuckerberg should still have his job?
I think there needs to be a serious conversation about the leadership of Facebook and whether they are being truly candid and transparent with regulators.
So do you think that he's the right person to lead Facebook?
I think it's clear that there have been a number of very large mistakes made, and I think that we need the leadership of that company to understand the damage that they're doing and take a different approach.
So let's talk about Sheryl, who's just been invited to Europe, the other leader. I mean, what do you think her responsibility or her culpability is here?
Well, I think they share responsibility in the sense that the two of them work very closely together, and she has done a lot of what would be the CEO functions at another company. They really share that role to some extent, and so I think they share responsibility for what's happened.
Have you gotten a lot of employees coming out of the woodwork to talk to you about how they feel in the wake of this crisis? What can you tell us about, you're one of the few public former employees. There are more now, but still not that many. What can you tell us about what you're hearing from the people who still haven't come out of the woodwork?
So I know that there are concerns inside the company, and I know that many people who are early Facebook employees who are no longer there have significant concerns, and a number of those folks have been talking publicly. I think the key thing to understand is that it's very difficult to be an employee at one of these companies and to speak out against practices at the company, and I hope that culture is starting to change. For example, with what happened with Project Maven and Google, is that the employees rose up and they demanded that Google not work with the Defense Department, and ultimately Google did change some of their policies. So my hope is that employees will become more engaged, take ownership, and push back against some of the decisions that they find problematic.
So Zuckerberg has said they're going to great lengths to prevent future election meddling, to clamp down on fake news. Isn't it enough? Can they prevent it?
They've taken some really important first steps, but they're only first steps. And I think you still have this credibility problem, which is that they haven't been fully transparent with regulators. And when you're talking about elections, that's something that regulators and lawmakers care a tremendous amount about, as do we all.
But what's the solution?
Well, I don't think there's any one solution. I think there are a number of steps that need to be taken. I think they've taken some of those, one of which is providing transparency, but they also need to address the fact that transparency with respect to ads that relate to elections, but they also need to go beyond that and ensure that people can actually understand the huge volume of these ads that are being made, and they need to be really clear about what their policies are and move in a deliberate fashion, which wasn't really represented by what happened in the Irish referendum, where they made a very sudden change just a few weeks before the election.
And you think there could be another Cambridge Analytica-sized scandal?
I believe that there is absolutely a very high probability of significant data misuse, considering the amount of data that was put out into the world.